For centuries, the galaxy had laughed at humanity's legends. Tales of the starborn Terrans, the stories whispered across trading hubs, passed down in fleet academies and embroidered into the myths of countless civilizations, spoke of a species that could endure annihilation, wield impossible technologies, and turn hopeless battles into decisive victories. They spoke of humans who could survive catastrophes that would have extinguished entire empires, who could strike with precision and patience unmatched by any other species, and whose cunning and adaptability defied comprehension. To the empires that dominated the stars, these tales were amusing curiosities at best. Among them, the Xerathi Dominion prided itself on absolute control. Its fleets spanned entire sectors, its armadas capable of reducing planets to rubble within hours, its officers trained from hatchlinghood in the art of war and diplomacy alike. They had never lost a major engagement in recorded history, and they had never considered humans a credible threat. Legends of the Terrans, they decided, were childish stories meant to embolden a weak species, nothing more. The Council of Xerath, the governing body of the Dominion, was arrogant in its certainty. It maintained its seat of power in the spire of the Black Star, a colossal station suspended in orbit around a dying sun. From there, its emissaries, generals, and scholars dictated policy across thousands of systems. The spire was not just a symbol of authority, it was the nerve center of an empire that had endured eons. Its command chambers gleamed with polished alloys and gravitic displays, projecting fleets across sectors, overseeing colonies, and monitoring rebellions before they could take root. Within these chambers, the idea of humanity as anything more than a curiosity was treated as preposterous. Yet, humans had been listening, quietly. They had observed the galaxy's arrogance, noting every flaw in Xerathi's strategy, every gap in their sensor networks, every weakness in their logistical chains. For every story dismissed as legend, for every laugh at the notion of the starborn Terrans, humanity had responded not with words, but with patience. Generations of engineers, scientists, and tacticians had honed fleets and colonies in hidden corridors of space that no alien had mapped. Technologies deemed impossible by the Dominion were quietly perfected. Every ship, every weapon, every fleet maneuver was tested in secret, rehearsed countless times, and recorded in simulations that spanned decades. The human colonies, scattered across remote systems, were not only self-sufficient, they were resilient in ways that the galaxy could not imagine. Their ships could fold space in undetectable ways. Their shields could bend energy and matter around them, and their weapons could disable fleets without indiscriminate destruction. The legends had not been invented to inspire, they were encoded in culture, a record of humanity's resilience and ingenuity, warning that if provoked, the Terrans could and would strike with absolute precision. When the Xerathi fleets finally approached human-held systems on the edge of the Krathan expanse, they expected fear. They assumed hesitation. They anticipated surrender. A council ambassador transmitted a decree across human space, unencrypted and absolute. The Xerathi Dominion demands immediate submission. All Terran colonies are to disarm. All fleets are to integrate into the collective order. Resistance will be met with annihilation. The Dominion expected obedience, or at least panic. They expected diplomats to beg for mercy, fleet commanders to hesitate, citizens to tremble. They expected compliance. What they did not expect was calm. Across every human colony, command centers remained orderly. Sensors monitored the incoming fleets, Communications coordinated silently, and ships lay ready in hidden staging zones. Humans did not panic. They did not argue. They did not negotiate. They had waited for this moment for centuries. Every officer, every engineer, every tactician understood their role. Every fleet had been deployed, every weapon system calibrated, every contingency accounted for. The Terran's patience was a weapon as sharp as any plasma lance. The humans studied the Council's forces. They anticipated the first strikes, calculated their responses, and predicted the enemy's strategy. Where the Exarathi relied on brute force and intimidation, humans relied on intelligence, preparation, and adaptability. Every ship, from the smallest frigate to the flagship, moved as if part of a single organism, each action synchronized to counter threats before they arose. Legends, dismissed by the galaxy as fanciful tales, were no longer just stories. They were warnings. They contained centuries of encoded knowledge, tactics, and philosophy designed to survive scrutiny and skepticism. Each story of Terran endurance, each tale of impossible survival, each account of the Starborn's cunning had been carefully crafted to prepare both human society and the galaxy for a single truth, that when provoked, humans would act with precision and fire unimaginable to those who had underestimated them. And now, the moment had come. The Exarathi Dominion had demanded submission. Humanity had prepared its answer. The galaxy, arrogant and dismissive for so long, was about to confront a species that did not bend, did not fear, and did not negotiate on unequal terms. The legends were real, the myths were alive, and the Terrans were about to show the consequences of underestimating them. The first movement of the fleet was subtle, a ripple in space, almost imperceptible to the Dominion sensors. But for those who watched closely, it was a signal that the long-awaited reckoning had begun. Humanity did not shout. They did not boast. They acted with the certainty of those who had waited for centuries for the exact moment to impose order upon arrogance. For the Exarathi, it would be the first time in millennia they realized that myths could be real and that the consequences of ignoring them could be catastrophic. The galaxy had demanded legends be dismissed. Humanity was about to answer. The edge of the Krathan expanse had long been considered a backwater, a cluster of star systems so far from the Dominion's central authority that only minimal patrols were maintained. It was here that the Exarathi fleets first encountered the Terran convoys, and it was here that the myth became reality. The Exarathi believed victory would be effortless. Their warships, elegant and terrifying, spread across space like a predator circling its prey. Plasma lances glimmered, graviton disruptors hummed with lethal intent, and ion cannons crackled with controlled fury. Every officer had calculated success with certainty. Every admiral had expected obedience. Every sensor array anticipated the Terran's panic. Yet what awaited them was not fear or surrender, it was the unimaginable. A ripple appeared across hyperspace lanes undetectable by the Dominion's most advanced sensors. At first, it was dismissed as a natural anomaly, a warp fluctuation. Then the fleet emerged, not vast in number, but perfect in design and purpose. The human ships glided into the battlefield with silent inevitability. Sleek, black, angular, and adorned with veins of shifting silver energy, the Terran flagship led the formation like a predator at the head of a pack. Alien weapons fired. Plasma beams lanced toward the Terran fleet, missiles streaked across the void, and graviton nets flung outward to ensnare the humans. And yet, nothing struck true. Energy bent around the ships, shields absorbed the fiercest strikes, and missiles dissolved mid-flight, detonating harmlessly in the emptiness of space. Entire squadrons froze in shock, their pilots staring at displays that defied logic. For the first time, the Exirathi realized that the legends were not fables, they were accurate, terrifyingly accurate. The humans did not attack immediately. They moved with measured grace, closing gaps only when necessary, adjusting positions with uncanny precision. Every maneuver anticipated the Exirathis' actions. Where alien fleets relied on reflex and raw firepower, humans relied on foresight and calculation, turning the Dominion's confidence into vulnerability. Their presence alone forced hesitation, confusion, and a growing sense of dread. Then the first strike was delivered, and it was surgical. A command ship at the center of the Exirathi formation was disabled in an instant. Its engines failed, communications went dark, and its weapons ceased responding. Not a single civilian world was harmed. Not a single life taken unnecessarily. The Terrans did not destroy, they incapacitated. They neutralized. They imposed control with precision that seemed almost preternatural. The flagship transmitted a message across the Dominion's networks, piercing the silence of disbelief. You laughed at our legends. You dismissed our stories. We are not myths. We are humans. We endure. We adapt, and we act when necessary. Panic spread through the Exirathi fleets. Officers who had spent lifetimes commanding warships found themselves paralyzed by an enemy that seemed to anticipate every move before it was made. Command chains failed as subordinates hesitated, unsure whether resistance was possible or futile. Across the expanse, the myth the starborn Terrans was alive, tangible, and far deadlier than any story could have conveyed. As the Terrans advanced, they struck only where strategic necessity dictated. Orbital weapons platforms, docking stations, and command hubs fell, disabled without collateral damage. Civilian populations were left untouched, but the message was undeniable. The Dominion had miscalculated. They had expected a primitive species. They had expected fear. They had expected failure, and they were wrong. Every movement reinforced the legends. Every strike validated the myths. The Exirathi, who had prided themselves on centuries of perfect strategy, were forced to confront a new reality. Humanity was not a species to be underestimated. It was a species that had survived, that had adapted, and that had waited patiently for the perfect moment to impose its will on the galaxy. By the time the first battle concluded, entire fleets had been neutralized without a single Terran loss. The myth had become flesh, metal, and energy, a force the galaxy could neither ignore nor hope to defeat through traditional means. Even the most senior Exirathi admirals could only stare at their crippled command screens and acknowledge the terrifying truth. The legends were real, and the humans who embodied them were coming. The starborn Terrans had arrived, and their patience had turned into unstoppable action. The myths were no longer stories. They were a prelude, a warning, and a promise of what would follow if arrogance dared to challenge humanity again. The galaxy was about to witness the full extent of the Terran legend. The Exirathi fleets, once symbols of invincibility across the sectors, were unprepared for what followed. What the galaxy had considered a minor species was moving with a precision and patience that no simulation, no tactical manual, no centuries of training could have predicted. Every human vessel acted as part of a single organism, each command anticipating not only immediate threats, but every possible countermeasure the Dominion could deploy. The first command ship that had been disabled was only the beginning. Communications, hubs, orbital defense arrays, and weapons stations across dozens of star systems were neutralized with a meticulousness that left the Xerathi floundering. Every strike was calculated, every movement deliberate. Not a single civilian world suffered. Entire fleets were rendered immobile in seconds, their engines failing, weapons locked down, systems silenced. The humans did not destroy indiscriminately. They applied judgment, precision, and overwhelming strategy to every encounter. From the bridge of the flagship, the human admiral transmitted a message that reverberated across the Dominion. You believed we were myth. You believed our legends were stories. We are not stories. We are humans. We endure. We adapt. And we act when necessary. Your fleets, your command centers, your war machines, they are powerless before our patience and precision. Heed this lesson. The psychological impact on the Xerathi was immediate and devastating. Officers froze in disbelief, unsure whether to follow orders or abandon their posts. Entire squadrons hesitated, their pilots staring at disabled weapon systems and non-responsive engines, unable to comprehend the impossibility of their situation. Generals argued in vain over holographic displays, attempting to deploy contingencies that had already been anticipated and countered. Fear rippled through the ranks, not fear of death, but fear of a species that had predicted and nullified every possible move. Meanwhile, the humans advanced deeper into Dominion space, striking not with fury, but with relentless discipline. Orbital weapons platforms were incapacitated, their targeting systems scrambled. Dockyards producing super-heavy warships were neutralized remotely, cranes and hulls frozen mid-construction. Sensor arrays that had once monitored entire star systems were disabled in seconds. Entire fleets became inert, as if frozen in time. And yet, civilians remained unharmed, colonies untouched, the Terran's message clear: humanity's power was not measured by destruction, but by mastery. The Dominion's admirals, once supremely confident, now faced the unthinkable. Their centuries of training, their perfectly calculated war doctrines, their most advanced ships, all were rendered meaningless against a species that had mastered not only technology, but strategy itself. Every maneuver humanity made highlighted a truth the galaxy had forgotten. Power was not merely the capacity to destroy, it was the capacity to act decisively, with judgment, intelligence, and restraint. The human fleet's assault was surgical. Xerathi dreadnought attempted a counterstrike, unleashing waves of plasma and ion energy. But the Terrans anticipated every vector. Defensive shields bent energy harmlessly into space. Missiles disintegrated before reaching their targets. Even the fleet's AI systems, designed to counter adaptive strategies, failed to predict the humans' maneuvers. Within moments, the dreadnought's engines shut down, weapons offline, systems paralyzed, leaving its crew staring helplessly as their flagship drifted in silence. Across the battlefield, Terran ships disabled entire squadrons without loss of life among civilians. Command stations that had orchestrated centuries of war were neutralized in minutes. The myth was alive, tangible, and terrifyingly efficient. The Terrans had not come to conquer. They had come to enforce a lesson in balance, patience, and precision. By the time the first full engagement concluded, The Xerathi fleets were in disarray. Their ships were immobilized, their communications fractured, their authority shattered. Officers recorded logs not of victories, but of disbelief, awe, and fear. Scholars would later describe the battle as the first true demonstration of humanity's strategic and technological supremacy, a species that had been dismissed, underestimated, and laughed at, now shaping the course of an entire dominion. The Terrans' actions sent a message that could not be ignored. Submission demanded respect. Arrogance had consequences, and legends once dismissed could come alive. The Xerathi would never underestimate humanity again. The myth had appeared, and it had delivered fire with precision, judgment, and inevitability. The galaxy was beginning to understand the most dangerous truth about humanity. Their greatest weapon was not their fleet, nor their weapons, nor even their numbers. It was their intelligence, patience, and unyielding resolve. The Terrans had acted. The Xerathi had failed to anticipate, and the battlefield would never be the same. By the time the Terran fleet withdrew from the immediate battlefield, the full scope of the impact had become clear. The Xerathi, once proud masters of the sectors, were fractured, confused, and terrified. Command chains that had operated flawlessly for centuries had collapsed in minutes. Fleets that had prided themselves on discipline and precision were immobilized, their crews staring at screens filled with impossible outcomes. Orbital stations, warships, and factories had been neutralized without unnecessary destruction. Yet the message was unmistakable. Humanity had arrived, and the age of assumed dominance was over. Across the Xerathi dominion, news of the engagement spread like wildfire. Communication relays, once tightly controlled, now carried reports of human precision and discipline from surviving ships, independent colonies, and even sympathetic systems that had observed the battle in secret. The psychological shock was immense. For the first time in millennia, subjects of the Dominion realized that obedience was no guarantee of safety, and that the galaxy contained forces beyond even the Xerathi's understanding. The collapse was not just military, it was systemic. Governors, admirals, and officers who had long relied on the perception of invincibility began to hesitate, questioning orders and reassessing risks. Entire sectors refused to mobilize fleets, choosing caution over engagement. Even the most loyal commanders documented their own disbelief, unable to reconcile the totality of the Terran's dominance with centuries of established doctrine. The Dominion's bureaucratic machinery, built for absolute control, began to fail under its own weight. Meanwhile, humans moved carefully, decisively, and invisibly. Their fleet did not linger to occupy worlds, nor did they establish colonies. Every action was surgical, aimed at disabling the tools of tyranny rather than inflicting wanton destruction. Orbital weapons that could obliterate planets were neutralized. Shipyards producing massive warships were incapacitated. Sensor arrays that had monitored entire systems for centuries were dismantled. Civilian populations were untouched. Humanity's strike was not mere vengeance. It was judgment executed with exacting precision. The Xerathi realized something even more terrifying than the fleet itself. Humans did not rely on numbers alone. They had achieved what the galaxy considered impossible because of intellect, foresight, and discipline. Every engagement, every maneuver, every strike was premeditated, leaving no room for error. The Dominion's greatest strengths, their numbers, their firepower, their centuries of tactical superiority, had been nullified by a species they had dismissed as weak, primitive, and insignificant. Even as humans withdrew, their influence persisted. Colonies that had been oppressed under the Dominion began to act independently. Systems that had enforced loyalty through intimidation discovered that restraint, competence, and leadership mattered more than fear. Trade networks reopened as fleets reorganized cautiously, balancing the need to recover with the memory of human precision. Diplomats, warlords, and officers documented humanity's methods with awe and trepidation, recognizing that a single miscalculation in the future could provoke a force that would respond with absolute inevitability. Across the galaxy, the legend of the starborn Terrans spread. Scholars analyzed every maneuver, military theorists debated every strategy, and philosophers considered the moral weight of a species that wielded immense power yet acted with restraint. The Terrans had not conquered. They had demonstrated the consequences of arrogance. They had enforced a new order, not through fear alone, but through calculated action that combined intelligence, morality, and overwhelming precision. The psychological impact on the Dominion's leadership was catastrophic. Councils convened in emergency sessions, desperate to salvage authority. Fleet commanders argued over contingencies, yet every plan had already been accounted for and countered. Advisors whispered of miscalculations, of legends made real, of arrogance punished. Panic and disbelief ran rampant among the ruling elite, eroding the foundation of control that had lasted millennia. Humanity's legacy in the Dominion systems became immediate and enduring. The mere knowledge of Terran capability reshaped decision-making, diplomacy, and military strategy. Every empire, every colony, every fleet in the sector understood the same immutable truth: underestimate humanity at your peril. The Terrans had demonstrated that the legends of old were real. They were alive, patient, and unstoppable when necessary. For the Exarathi, the battle was not merely a loss, it was an awakening. The galaxy they had ruled with certainty had changed in moments. Commanders, diplomats, and citizens alike would forever bear the memory of what humans could do. Fleet doctrines would be rewritten, histories would be amended, and the arrogance of the past would be tempered with respect. Humanity had returned not to conquer, but to enforce a lesson that would echo across the stars for generations. And yet, the humans had done more than win. They had elevated the principle of restraint. In every neutralized system, the citizens remained unharmed. In every crippled fleet, survival was permitted. The Terrans had proven that ultimate power was not merely destruction, but the ability to impose judgment with precision. They had acted as both force and teacher, leaving the Dominion permanently altered. The galaxy indelibly reminded: legends were not lies, and the starborn Terrans were real. The collapse of the Dominion was total, but humanity's presence was measured. They did not occupy. They did not dominate. They left only the memory of their fire, the certainty of their capability, and the unshakable respect of the galaxy. The myth had not just arrived, it had reshaped reality. The Terran fleet, having completed its mission of judgment and precision, began its withdrawal. The movement was deliberate, silent, and calculated. There was no celebration, no fanfare, no need to assert dominance beyond the clarity of action already taken. Humanity's presence was a lesson, not a conquest. The myth, once dismissed across the galaxy as exaggeration or fantasy, had walked into the light, and now the consequences of underestimating the Terrans would be felt for generations. The Exarathi Dominion, the pride of the galaxy, was in ruins. Fleets that had once commanded entire sectors were immobilized, their crews paralyzed by disbelief and fear. Command structures that had been flawless for centuries were fractured, leaving generals and admirals scrambling for solutions they had long thought unnecessary. The empire's bureaucrats attempted to salvage authority through frantic diplomacy and hastily rewritten doctrine, but the damage was already permanent. The galaxy had witnessed what humans could do, and that memory alone was enough to reshape every decision, every calculation, every thought of resistance or domination. Across the sectors, colonies and independent systems began to reassess their position. Where once fear dictated obedience, now caution and respect prevailed. Merchant fleets rerouted through safer hyperspace lanes. Governors reconsidered their loyalty to the Dominion, and entire populations realized that the galaxy was no longer governed solely by power, but by intelligence, patience, and the certainty of retribution. Humanity had demonstrated that dominance did not require slaughter, but mastery. The Terrans' restraint amplified the terror of their capability. Human historians and scholars, observing from hidden colonies, chronicled the engagement in excruciating detail. Every maneuver, every strike, every act of surgical judgment was analyzed and stored for posterity. It was not enough to win battles. The Terrans understood that the legend itself must endure. Generations would remember not only the fire of human action, but the deliberate mercy that accompanied it. The galaxy must know that to provoke humanity was to invite judgment, but to respect it was to survive. Even as their fleet receded into uncharted hyperspace lanes, the humans left their mark on the stars. Orbital weapons and shipyards lay incapacitated but intact, demonstrating capability without unnecessary destruction. Civilian populations flourished in the wake of human engagement, seeing a species capable of unmatched power and yet unparalleled restraint. Across countless star systems, whispers spread. The legends were not myths, the stories were real, and the Terrans the Starborn had returned. The Xerathi, now humbled and fractured, struggled to understand the depth of their failure. Advisors debated endlessly over fleet formations, planetary defenses, and diplomatic strategies, attempting to predict the next move of a species that had mastered foresight, patience, and adaptability beyond imagination. Philosophers and strategists concluded that humanity's greatest strength was not in its ships or weapons, but in the mastery of choice, when and how to act, when to strike, and when to exercise restraint. The galaxy had observed not a conquest, but a demonstration of perfect judgment. Across other empires and civilizations, the message was no less profound. Every species capable of thought understood that the legends of humanity were now facts. Stories once dismissed as comforting tales or propaganda became cautionary histories. The Starborn Terrans had returned, and they had rewritten the rules of engagement for the entire galaxy. For every leader, commander, and civilian, a new truth had been etched: underestimate humanity at your peril. And yet, humanity did not linger to enforce dominance. Their colonies remained hidden, their fleets folded into obscure hyperspace lanes, and their presence was felt only through the memory of precision and judgment. The galaxy had been forever altered, not through occupation or tyranny, but through the certainty that humanity existed, endured, and would act when necessary. The myth had appeared on the battlefield, and now it would persist as both warning and legend. In the silent reaches of space, where the Terran fleet had vanished, historians and philosophers would one day write of the Starborn's return as a turning point in galactic history. The legends had become reality. The myths had walked among the stars, and the galaxy, for all its pride and arrogance, would never again treat humanity as anything less than a force of inevitability. The humans had answered the disbelief of centuries with fire, judgment, and restraint. The Xerathi Dominion would never recover its former arrogance. Empires across the sectors would recalibrate their ambitions. And throughout the stars, one truth would resonate louder than any weapon's roar. Humanity was patient, unstoppable when provoked, and a species that would not be dismissed again. The myth was real. The legend had returned, and the galaxy would never forget.